Welcome back. My name is Russell Cottrell, and in this series of videos we're editing a photo in PhotoLine using curves. In this video we're going to learn how to use, you guessed it, color filters and blend modes, and we're going to apply them to saturation and RGB curves. First, color filters. Color filters tell PhotoLine to show or apply a layer only when certain conditions are met, such as when the background color is red. Any layer can have a color filter accessed by right-clicking the layer and clicking Color Filter. We can specify conditions for the layer itself and/or the background. It's the background that we're primarily interested in. The easiest way to illustrate how it works will be to apply it to the bare layer. The default color space for the filter is grayscale, meaning that the layer will be displayed based on the luminance value of the background. But we're going to select the HIS color space. The default channel is hue. A hue gradient is displayed with selection arrows for the hue range. If we start moving these arrowheads, you'll see that the space between the arrows is white, and the space outside is black. Also, the arrowheads can be split, leaving a gray gradient between them. And since the hue gradient wraps around the ends, red to red and around again, the space between the arrows can wrap around too. We can move both arrows together by clicking and dragging the white space between them. Now the white space wraps around, and we can move the split arrows as units by similarly dragging the gray gradient between the split sides. So how does all this work? The layer in question will be displayed only where the underlying hue matches the color filter. As with layer masks, white reveals and black conceals. The white space between the arrows indicates the hue range that will allow the layer to be displayed, and the gray gradients provide a smooth transition between hues. So if the white space includes yellow and green, the color of the foliage, the bear is displayed. Unfortunately, he has some holes in him because of the magenta flowers. If we move the color filter away from green and yellow, the bear disappears. Beam me up, Scotty. To get rid of the color filter, click the Reset button. Now let's apply a color filter to our saturation curve. Let's say we only want to saturate the red hues in the image. Right-click Color Filter HIS. Let's split the arrowheads, move them closer together, then wrap the white area around the ends to cover all the reds. Adjust the positions a little. Now we have the reds selected. We click OK, and now, if we toggle the layer, we see that only the reds increase in saturation. Red includes brown, which is usually a dark unsaturated red, and orange a little. Or, what if we only want to increase the saturation of the foliage? Open the color filter and move the filter to cover yellow and green as well. In digital imaging, foliage, it turns out, is mostly a dark yellow. Okay, and now it's the foliage that's more saturated. With color filters, a saturation curve may be applied to any hue range, just as it is with a conventional saturation control, and a mask may be used on the layer to isolate a specific area if needed. Color filters plus masks can be a powerful selection tool. Now we're going to talk about our second subject, blend modes. On the layer list, beside the layer opacity, there's this field that says Normal. This is the blend mode, and it tells PhotoLine how to combine a layer with what comes below it. Color filters determine whether to apply a layer or not. Blend modes determine how to apply it. If we click the blend mode, we see a large list of choices that includes things like linear burn and pin light, but the most important ones are at the very bottom, color and luminance. Color blend mode applies the adjustment only to the color component of the image and actually includes both hue and saturation. Luminance is not affected. Luminance blend mode applies the adjustment to, you guessed it, luminance only, and color is not affected. In normal mode, an adjustment layer is applied to all the channels as is, without any attempt to preserve things like hue or saturation or luminance. What this means is that when we increase the saturation, for example, of a given pixel, the luminance may change as well. We can see this by changing the blend mode of our saturation layer. Let's remove the color filter. When we change from normal to color mode, the image subtly changes. Normal, color. If we change to luminance mode and toggle the layer, we can see the luminance change. It may not look like that big a deal, but when you've done a lot of work getting the luminance and contrast exactly the way you want it, you may not want another layer messing it up. Now, if this is a saturation layer, why not choose saturation blend mode? You can, and for this image it doesn't seem to make any difference. But when we get to color balance, color is a much better choice than either hue or saturation, and I'm just in the habit of selecting either luminance or color for most adjustment layers. You can try it both ways. Now, what about luminance mode? Our sky layer is an RGB layer, and we adjusted all three channels together, but it was intended to adjust only the luminance and contrast, not the color. So let's change the blend mode from normal to luminance. It's a small change, but it's there. We can see the color change if we set the blend mode to color and turn the layer off and on. If you look at the upper right corner, for example, you'll see the hue change. If we don't want unexpected color changes, we should use luminance mode for an RGB layer like this. There's actually another way to adjust luminance only, and that is to use the L channel of LAB. We're going to delve into LAB in the next video. Suffice it to say that because of how it works, it should be used with normal blend mode. Now let's talk about color balance. RGB curves may be used for this. We haven't paid much attention to the individual R, G, and B channels so far. Let's create a curves layer and work with them some more. As you can see, raising the red curve adds red, lowering it subtracts red, and similarly for the other curves. But in normal blend mode, raising the curves makes the image lighter, as you can see. Conventional images are made of RGB pixels, and raising all three lightens the image. Lowering them makes the image darker. If we want to manipulate the curves without lightening or darkening the image, we'll need to use color blend mode. Now, raising or lowering the red curve adds or subtracts red, but in a way that does not change the luminance. So lowering the red curve may just as well be thought of as adding cyan, which is a combination of green and blue, and is the opposite of red. Similarly, subtracting green is like adding magenta, which is a combination of red and blue. And subtracting blue is like adding, guess what? If you know your primary colors, red plus green equals yellow. So RGB curves may also be thought of as CMY curves. When something has too much magenta, subtract it by raising the green curve and so forth. So let's use RGB curves to adjust the color balance of the image. Reset. Imagine that we wanted to warm the lighter areas of the image as if it were lit by a sunset, ignoring the fact that the sun is obviously high in the sky. Let's select all the channels first. Now if we run the mouse over the soil, for example, we see that the light areas are around 2/3 to 3/4 of the way to the top of the curve as we would expect. So this is where we will add our points. Warm suggests yellow and red, and that's what we add. It seems more logical to me to add the yellow first, then add red to complement it. So let's lower the blue curve a little. We'll select the blue curve, then add a point here. We're going to want to move the point little by little. To nudge a point, we can use the arrow keys. So, down arrow. 8 clicks. Pulling the point down makes the light areas noticeably yellower. Now let's switch to the red curve and add a point. Raising it a little, usually not as much as the blue curve, gives a pleasing warm tone. That was 5 to 8. Now, you may be asking, doesn't PhotoLine have a color balance adjustment? Yes. Layer, new adjustment layer, color balance. And it closely resembles what we just did. There are cyan red, magenta green, and yellow blue axes, and a checkbox that says preserve luminosity. One can also specify shadows, midtones, or highlights, which would be like putting points on the curve low, middle, or high. Curves have an advantage with complex subjects such as an old faded photograph whose colors are very out of whack and beyond a simple parametric adjustment. As before, one can move any part of each curve as needed, selecting critical areas such as flesh tones, for example. We can also do some tricks with curves that would be more difficult with a color balance control. For example, some people like to exaggerate blue shadows and warm highlights. This is easily done by taking hold of a shadow and raising the blue curve, then lowering the high end of the curve to add yellow to the highlights. A little while back, we had mentioned using color blend mode as opposed to hue or saturation. One might think that color balance was a matter of hue, but if we change the blend mode to hue, it just doesn't work. We get odd hue changes without the impression of changing lighting conditions that we expect. Likewise, saturation blend mode saturates the reds and yellows without a true color balance change. What we're after is a combination of hue and saturation, which means color blend mode. Here is a graphic with my take on blend modes. I will make the radical statement that every RGB adjustment layer should either be in luminance or color blend mode, depending on what you're doing. Saturation layers should always be color, and LAB should always be normal. Well, that was a wide-ranging tour de force. In the next video, we will look at LAB curves. Prepare to have your horizons expanded.